In today's video, I'm going to show you guys how to make homemade tamales from scratch and homemade tamale pie in case you don't have the time to invest in making the tamales. For the Homestead Home Education chapters, I'm going to show you guys what we've been up to. Of course, at the very end, I will have a devotion as usual. Feel free to jump around to the chapters that interest you most. Please don't forget to help me out and like and share this video if you enjoy it. I'm going to show you guys how to make authentic tamales. I learned how to make these over 20 years ago from a friend. Okay, so it has been 20 years ago. If I recall the story correctly, she learned how to do these from her mother, who was from Mexico and was Spanish. So that's why I'm saying they're authentic. But you know what? I have never been to Mexico and I've never seen the women making tamales, so I guess I don't know for sure. But what I do know for sure is that these are a super special and incredibly delicious delicacy. And I have been told by people that do know that these are the real deal. So let me show you how to make these. All right, so I'm a bigger family mama and I've got teenagers too. So when I make this recipe, I make a huge quantity. And to be honest, I've actually always done a huge quantity because if I'm going to go through all of the trouble of making these, I want to have extras for the freezer because it is quite a process making these. So here is my recipe. It's 9 pounds of meat. You could use chicken or you could use beef. If you're using beef, I like to use hamburger. I do not think that is traditional though. I think shredded beef is more traditional. You'll want around 9 quarts of water. And the water is important because we're going to need that brothy liquid later for when we make the masa harina and for when we make the mole sauce. And then you'll want your seasonings. You can use any taco seasoning or Mexican seasoning, fiesta seasoning, or if you want to be a purist, you could use 4 teaspoons of salt, approximately 1 teaspoon of salt per pound of meat, and garlic. I'm going to let you be the judge of how much garlic you want to put in. For 9 pounds of meat, I'll definitely use a whole head of garlic. Then you simply cook all the meat. Once it's done, you strain off the liquids like this. For the cheese and the tamales, you can use mozzarella, you could use cheddar, or you could use a more traditional Mexican cheese. I am actually making a chèvre. Chèvre is super simple to make. If you don't want to do that though, you can just use one of the other cheese choices like cheddar or mozzarella or a traditional Mexican cheese, which you can find in the Mexican food dairy section in most grocery stores. If you do want to make your own homemade cheese for this, I'll tell you how. It's actually pretty simple and super quick. You just take a gallon of milk. I'm actually using 2 gallons and a cup of cider vinegar. So I'll be using 2 cups of cider vinegar. Next, you heat this up to between 175 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat it slowly so you don't scorch it. Once it's up to temp, you hold it there for about 10 minutes. You might need to reduce the heat. Then you slowly stir in the vinegar until curds begin to form. Looks like I'm actually making 3 gallons of milk here. We get a lot of goat milk from our goats. All right, so after you do all that, you remove the pot from the heat, and then you remove the curds from the liquid into a muslin-lined dish or colander strainer. After that, you tie the ends of the cloth into a knot to form like a ball or a bag, and this is going to drain off the whey. So here's how I do it. I use a long spoon like this and put it over the pot and make sure it's not touching on the bottom because you want all that whey to drain out of it. I like to drain it for a long time when I'm making something like this. So I will drain mine for probably about 5 hours because I want this to be a firmer cheese. I don't want it to make a bunch of liquid inside of my dish. I want it to melt nicely. But you guys, that's it. That is all there is to it. It's so simple. You're also going to want onions. Again, I'm going to let you be the judge of that because some people love onions, some people not so much. We happen to love them, so the sky is kind of the limit. Again, if you want to keep it more traditional, you'll use about 2 whole onions. You do not have to saute them, but if you do choose to, that brings out more flavor and sweetness in the onions, and it kind of helps out with masking them for the tiny humans in the household. You don't want large chunks in this. You want everything to be smaller so that when you roll the tamale, you don't have a bunch of large wonky sized pieces and small ones. I like to use my KitchenAid to help me make all of the meat pieces more uniform. It helps to soften up all of the meat. While you are doing this part though, you might want to taste test it as you go. You may want to add a little bit more seasonings or salt. And of course, if it seems just a little dry, you can add broth. I'll give you a little trick for making tamales. I like to make all of the meat filling on day 1, and I like to do the second part on day 2, because if you do all of this on the same day, it's going to make for a really long day, and you can do it that way. Just know that this process is going to take you quite a few hours. So that's what I did. I spread this out over 2 days. So on day 1 I made the meat sauce, and now it's day 2 and we're going to make the masa harina and the tamales. So first of all, I'm just mixing everything together, not the chicken broth. I'm mixing the masa and the shortening together, and I'm getting it thoroughly incorporated. For the masa, I've got 6 cups of masa harina and 2 cups of fat. You could use lard, butter, or shortening. And then we're gonna want about 4.5 cups of broth. You don't have to add it, but I did add about 3 teaspoons of salt. Okay, now pay attention. The consistency of the masa is important. So to know when your masa is ready and if it has enough liquid, you want to take a piece of it and drop it into a jar of water. If it floats, it's got enough liquid and it's ready. If it doesn't, you might want to add some more liquid. I like to be skimpy on the liquid at first and only add more as needed. I usually find 4.5 cups to be perfect. All right, I did the float test and I got a little piece here to float. So now it's time to knead this for just a second, and then we're gonna get started. And I've got some hungry kids, so I need to hurry. I'm not gonna have time to get tamales done for lunch today. So what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna do a little trick that I kind of made up years ago for when I was craving tamales, but didn't wanna take, like a half a day to make them. The trick is called a tamale pie. And I got the idea from a recipe that I saw in one of my grandma's recipe boxes, and it's called just a tamale pie. It's super simple. It's a lot faster, not quite as special, because there's something about all those individually wrapped tamales that is just special. I said special too many times, didn't I? I do that. All right, this is done. This is so done and it's so ready. I feel like it could be a little bit more moist, but it's gonna be okay. This is actually how it's supposed to be. I personally like my masa harina mix to be a little bit more on the delicate side, I guess you could say, not quite so dry. I think this is gonna be good though, and I did it the traditional way where you're supposed to make sure it floats, and it did. I tried to keep it more moist, but it wouldn't float when it was more moist. So we're good. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be great. To make the tamale pies, it's really easy, and it is a non-overwhelming way to basically make a tamale for people out there that find the whole process of tamale making, which I'll show you in a minute, to be overwhelming. First thing I did is I greased my dishes here. You want them to be fairly well greased. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take some of the filling, I'm gonna flatten it. Now we're just gonna press this just like we would with a pie crust into the pan. And you don't want it too thick and you don't want it too thin. I would say probably less than 1/4 inch thick, maybe closer to 1/8 of an inch thick. You want it to be just about like the same thickness that you would have if you were having a tamale. And we're gonna do basically just like we would for a pie crust. Filling from yesterday. Now I need a liquid, so you could use gravy, you could use mole, which would be really good and optimal. I do not have any made up yet, so I'm in a hurry to get this lunch done up for the kids because I know they're hungry and it's about lunchtime, so I need to hurry. So I'm gonna use salsa instead. Mole, like I said, would be better. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna put probably about 2 cups. We're gonna do a chicken one, and then we're gonna do a beef one, and I've got the beef underneath here. about a cup of salsa over the top. I think I'll do probably 2 cups, it looks like. It's gonna need about 2 cups. This is salsa from last year's garden. I grew, I think, all of the ingredients that went into this salsa. Now here comes a little bit of the really tricky part. We could cook it like this, or we could add more of the masa harina topping. It is hard to do more of the masa harina topping when you can't like roll it out. I have wax paper. Now the trick is we don't want this too thick. We want it to be thin, which is what makes it so tricky because it makes it harder to get off the wax paper and to put on there. But I think it's gonna work out just fine. Oh my gosh, you guys see that? I've got this big, huge island now and I'm still operating as if I have a very tiny amount of space. Got room to spread out here, let's spread out. Alright, I've got it. Now to get it transferred onto these, I'm not sure, is that one enough? Well, I think we're gonna go with this one over here. Okay, let's see if we can do this. Very, very delicate. Ah. It worked. Look at that. That's perfect. So now I need a knife. It's gonna. It's okay if it gets some holes in it, by the way. We don't really want a crust on this, so I'm pushing down all of the sides. It is time to make the tamales. So this looks weird. What it is I've got this skillet. It's just for weight. Then I have a bowl here. And for probably maybe about 8 hours, I have been soaking the corn husks. You can soak them overnight or you can soak them for a few hours. You just want them to be hydrated and flexible. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go to my sink and I'm gonna drain the water out of this. All right, I've drained these and I'm just gonna set them upright like this so they can finish draining out. This year I'm gonna save my own corn husks from the garden. So you're gonna wanna clear a nice large working space to lay these out. I'm gonna set this here. I've got my filling here and we're gonna get started. Pretty easy to do these. You just want some spoons. This is the most technical part of making the tamales. It takes a little bit of coordination. I'm showing you guys how to do this the way it was taught to me. You take the corn husk and you put it in the palm of your hand, and then you take a spoonful of masa. With the back of the spoon, you spread it across the corn husk like this. You can make large tamales or smaller tamales. It is a little bit of an art to get the thickness of the masa just right. If you like it really thick, you could go with more. If you like it thinner, you would go with less. And it's tricky also to get the masa and the meat balance just right. So this is going to take you some trial and error most likely. I like to squish the meat together like you see here so that it holds together and doesn't have like air pockets inside of it. And then you roll it. And again, this part is a little technical. I like to smash down the one side and get it as close as possible like you see here, and then peel back the one edge and then seal over the other edge like you see here. And we've got a almost perfect tamale. You close it off like this and then you fold the end. Once you have maybe 3 or 4 of these made. There's a little trick that is fun that I learned how to do with these. When you're making these, you will have some corn husks that are not big enough to use for a tamale. They'll be too thin. So take those, make them into strips, tie them together like this, and then you can bundle your tamales. This can be done individually or you can do it in groups. Not only does this look pretty and add a kind of fancy little flair, it actually serves a purpose too. When you go to steam these, it helps to hold them upright in the pan when they're all bundled together like this. To cook the tamales, simply put them in a steamer and steam them for about 45 minutes. I have another video with my enchiladas recipe. It includes homemade tortillas. I'm not sure if it will be published before or after this video, but once it is published, look in the description box below. If you enjoyed this video, I think you'll like that one too.
We have all kinds of fun stuff happening around the homestead today. Over here, my oldest son is making a 1-cap mushroom bed.
We are year-round homeschoolers. I guess you could say we are kind of sort of on a summer break right now. Even so, the learning does not stop around here. Over here we have this cabin and my girls asked if they could fix it up. So I found them some paint and supplies and they're over here listening to oldies and seem to be having a good time. A couple of the boys are helping off and on. I think if you were to ask them, they would say, this is the ultimate home ed arts and crafts project. For now, the kids are going to use this place as a hangout and we'll use it as a guest house. Long term, we're not quite sure what we're going to do with this cabin yet. Thought about turning it into a barn because it is kind of rough right now. Also thought about turning it into a bakery. I don't know. I think with a little TLC, this place has a lot of potential. What do you guys think we should do with it? Stick around because in a minute, I'll show you the after. It's a drastic improvement from what you see here.
And we still have one bed here that we have not tackled. It's completely taken over with weeds. This is supposed to be the asparagus bed. Still got to get to it.
I guess you could call this a Mycology home ed project. We don't really know what we're doing with this 1-cap mushroom bed. We are still learning, always learning. We looked up how to do one. It seems pretty straightforward. We prepared this little bed and then we're supposed to scatter wood chips. I'm hoping the pine cones count. There was already a bunch of wood that had fallen from the fir tree. We're supposed to scatter the sawdust spores on wood chips. So I bought these 1-cap mushroom spores from a new friend. She said wait till the bag of them turns quite white before planting, and these were pretty white. They don't look at hair as much, so we're supposed to sprinkle the spores and sawdust that was in the bag and then cover it with more sawdust and try to keep it wet all summer. I'm hoping we're going to be able to achieve that. We do live in a somewhat of a drier area and we also live on a mountain and water can be limited at times. If this winds up being successful, we should have 1-cap mushrooms in October, I believe. I hope it's successful, but even if it's not, we did learn a lot about fungi and mycology while doing this. With garden season being in full swing, we've been doing a lot of planting, weeding, and of course, harvesting. I read a book years ago by Kim Brenneman called Large Family Logistics, and I did a review on that book. You can look for that in the description below. But in the book, she talked about how it works better to have your children work with you instead of just telling them go do XYZ. I love this because it gives me an opportunity to spend some quality time with my children and teach them valuable lessons that they will be able to carry with them their entire life. One of my favorite discussions to have with them when we're working in the garden is to talk about how bad things like bad habits, unhealthy unhealthy habits, and essentially things that God would call sin can creep into our lives just like the weeds in the garden. If we do not daily seek those weeds out and pull them in the garden and in our spiritual life, they will rob all of the plant's blessings, the nutrition. They will hog up the sunlight and block out sunlight from the plants and essentially crowd out the good plants. And so in life, it works the same. We have to work on making good habits. We have to work on weeding out the bad habits. We have to have daily conversations with God. And if we don't do that, the same thing can happen in our lives that happens with the plants. They will get choked out by the weeds. They will essentially start dying back, and we will not have a harvest from them. I find that this is an effective illustration, and we all learn best with good illustrations to go along with Bible verses. So the Bible verse for this devotion is Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. I promise to show you guys the after views of the cabin. I don't have video clips. I hope that's okay. All I have are these pictures that I took after we got it all finished. Let me know in the comments what you guys think we should do with this space. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and don't forget to hit the bell for notifications, because if you don't hit that bell, hitting subscribe is pretty much worthless. YouTube will not let you know when I produce a video. So hit the bell too. Thank you again.